part of the presentation is again slightly shorter than Maite's, maybe 10 minutes or so, going through the new cholera guidelines that came out in 2018 to try and highlight the differences between the old guidelines, the new guidelines, and to clarify a few points which we've seen caused a few problems or questions when rolling out and using new guidelines. Okay. All right. So here is the new cholera guideline that we're using, which is different from the old yellow book. Some of you might remember the yellow book. So this is the management of a cholera epidemic. It's in digital form and paper form. You see the links here. You have the medical guideline, which is the same book, but it's in the medical part of the internet, in the English one. And also there's the French there as well, which we'll do tomorrow. And then the extranet, which is the full PDF if you need it. So I advise you to download the one more suitable for you and keep it handy so you can refer to it when needed. Okay. This is the actually approved one. Some of you might see there was one dated August 2017, and that was a draft version. The only major differences was a little bit to do with the medical and the pediatrics. So it didn't affect the logistics. So if you were referring to the 2017 August one, it would still be correct for the Watson. But please refer to this one when you can. Okay, so the new cholera guidelines is a slightly bigger book than last time, and it has a different kind of technique or way of showing information. So the new objectives, or the objectives, are to keep it short and sweet and simple, to keep the essential information that you need to know, make it a reference and help you check with the existing publications of what's going on. The most important thing for me is question what was historic practice versus what is useful practice. And you'll see that a bit later on, that some things we used to do historically over and over and over again were not necessarily the best things to do at the time. And now the next point is the key points to highlight, which I will go through, are the patient flow and the circuit of the patients in a CTC, CTU, IPC practices, infection prevention control practices, and hand hygiene. Everybody questions dead body management, which has been made a little bit clearer in this new guideline. Dimensioning and the internals of a CTC, and touching again on what Maite said about community and hygiene and disinfection kits, because it's a very big focus for the new guidelines. Okay, so the first one to look at is the patient circuit. As we say, the entry and the exit are separated. There's only two main areas. There's the clean and contaminated areas, which have to be controlled by a guard. Inside the medical part of the hospitalization, there's no big division between the A, B, and C patients. Instead, we're looking at the signs of the patient and deciding which treatment they have based on that. But it gives you the possibility of mixing different levels in the tent, so it reduces your volume a little bit. And also the more serious patients, the ones in the bed, the less serious ones can be sitting down and things like this. So then you have the observation and recovery, which I'll show you in a minute, can be within the same area or the same tent, where the patients are under observation and receive ORS, even if they're on observation or they are recovering. And as I mentioned before, if possible, to reduce the number of beds and stuff, you can prepare a chair with a hole cut in it and a bucket underneath for the less severe patients to sit on who are recovering or are not so severe with cholera. So now let's have a quick look at the plan, and I'll talk you through the plan. I hope everyone can see the plan clearly, or fairly clearly. If you look in the top right-hand corner, under the word differences, you'll see that is where the patients enter and they go into the triage. From the triage, they were taken through into the observation tents, which are the two tents at the bottom there. The yellow and the blue things you see on the corner are locations of latrines. Then from the observation tent, they're taken through a guarded area, through a checked area, where we used to put foot baths there, but we don't put foot baths there anymore, but we can still spray the feet with chlorine solution, because the foot baths seem to be not functioning very well and actually cause more mud than anything else. But we can spray the feet as a kind of psychological response on people going from a cleaner area to a dirty area. Then you see it goes into the hospitalization. You have the hospitalization area for the tents, as I said, with the ABC mixed. The bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the morgue and the waste management area. With the morgue has its own separate exit, and the waste management area is fully fenced and has the normal things for a waste management area. When the patient is finished in hospitalization and is leaving the facility, they go from hospitalization back through observation and can exit on the right-hand side, if you can see that. So that shows you how they're using the same tent for observation, or the same area for observation and recovery. That's if needed. It's not necessary, but if needed, sometimes you'll find you're limited with space, and it's possible to do it that way. In the top left-hand corner, you'll see the logistical area, which is the nurse's dressing station, the water supply, the chlorine production, the usual log supply, and associated tents, the logistics. So just to show you in the guidelines, the only major difference between this and the new one is you could possibly do observation and recovery in the same area. Okay, next. This shows one of the problems we often get. The reason why we have so much security in the entrance and also coming across into hospitalization is to limit the number of caretakers and the number of people that come into the CTC. And you can see here, there's people on drips who should be lying on the bed. The beds aren't cholera beds. We can't tell who's the patient and who's the caretaker, and it's a bit disorganized. So it's very key to control who you have going in and out of the CTC CTU, or as Maite says, it becomes a cholera transmission center more than a treatment center. Okay, so the next part is the hand and infection prevention control. Hand washing points chlorine in key areas. So entrance to tents, the separation of zones between the clean area and the dirty area. By the bathrooms, the hand washing points can be with soap and water next to the toilets if you wish. As I mentioned before, please try and avoid now foot baths because it's not proven to be effective. Also, they're difficult to maintain and they cause a lot of mud all over the place. And keep the sprayers for key locations for the feet only, with like a plastic sheet if you want to, for psychological reasons, mainly at the entrance into the triage and the crossover point into the hospitalization area, because they are the two major areas that need to be controlled the most. Okay, let's go a little bit more into hand hygiene. The same amount of water as the old guidelines, 60 litres per person per day minimum. Obviously you can do more than that if you need to. The laundry side of things, when you do the washing of the clothes, the first wash should be with soap and water. The second wash should be disinfection for 15 minutes in a 0.05% solution. And the third wash is a rinse with water, because the 0.5% solution you want to remove because it can affect the skin a little bit. For the floors, you want to wash the floors twice a day with soap and water first, and then disinfect with 0.2% chlorine solution. When you're doing all this work, you have your PPE, which has plastic gloves, plastic apron, a breathing mask, goggles to stop splashes, and rubber boots. Then what we were thinking, what's the new guideline says, you have things like excreta pits or vomit pits, which are close to the tent. The reason why they're doing this is to try and have something separate other than a latrine. So it's more like just a hole or a pit that's lined. I will show you a picture in a minute. So we could dispose of the excreta and the vomits without having to enter latrines and thereby maybe contaminating the existing latrines. And you'll see the last bit there is just a little visualization of the water and soap and rinsing with water, and then 15% chlorine solution and rinsing with water again. Okay. So this is an example of, I don't know if you can see it clearly, an excreta pit for stools and vomit. So as the hygienist takes the bucket from underneath the bed or the bucket from by the patient's head that has the vomit in, they just go outside the tent where there is this pit that can be located easily, where you can empty the vomit and the bucket and the stool bucket directly into there, so you don't have to go to the latrine anymore that might contaminate the latrine. Okay. A bit more on hand hygiene, because it's very important for cholera. Chlorinated water 0.05, washing your hands. So chlorinated water, to wash your hands in such a solution will kill the cholera vibrio if your hands are clean. Preferred option if your hands are visibly clean. So if your hands are visibly clean, one of the best way of killing the virus is washing your hands with 0.05% chlorine solution. Soap and water gets the vibrio and the dirt off your hands, but doesn't necessarily kill it, but removes it. Its preferred option when the hands are dirty, and maybe you can disinfect afterwards. The idea is you have to take the dirt off your hands, otherwise the chlorine will react with the dirt and not with the vibrio you're trying to kill. Okay, and sometimes you see also the medical people use the alcoholic solutions, those hydroalcoholic solutions. It's mainly used by the medical staff to kill the vibrio, which it does. But after 5 or 6 uses, we advise that you wash your hands with soap and water, because you have a build-up layer on the skin of a fat or an oil that is formed, which possibly can be contaminated with dirt, and then you have to start all over again. So after 5 or 6 uses of the alcohol rub, you should wash your hands with soap and water. It's not a detergent. It doesn't get your hands clean. The alcohol rub does not get your hands clean. It disinfects. So your hands must be already clean before you use the alcohol solutions. And the most important thing is, obviously, after taking all this care about washing your hands properly, drying your hands. Do not use common towels or fabrics, because you will risk recontamination of your hands. Use only disposable products if you can, or something that could be immediately taken, one-use stuff that can be taken to the laundry straight away. Okay. So this was just an extract from the new cholera guidelines, just telling you the critical times for hand washing. I won't go through this because it's fairly obvious, but it's something for you to look at when you look at the slide. When you're entering the CTC and when you're leaving the CTC, both for staff and patients. And the key is to every action you do is a critical action for washing your hands. From feeding the patient or going to the toilet, obviously, soil laundry. They did say smoking. We will actually, it's in the guidelines, smoking, but we don't want to encourage smoking at all in a CTC at all. So that's something that should be taken out altogether. But you can reference that later. Okay, the other one that people are very keen on is management of dead bodies. In the olden days, it was something that was a very touchy subject, and it still has to be done with great care. The body is now cleaned with a sponge, not with a sprayer. Before, people used to use a backpack sprayer and spray the body in the bag. But we still use a 2% chlorine solution, but a sponging action is more respectful and more appropriate to the corpse. And we don't have to put the cotton wool soaked in chlorine in the orifices if the funeral will be within 24 hours. So if the person knows we're going to bury the person within 24 hours, then we do not need to plug the orifice as such. But if the funeral is more than 24 hours, yes, but only by trained medical personnel. And a very important point that came up recently in Yemen and in a few other places, the above practice should be done by a medical person, and the procedure should be approved by the community. In some places, handling bodies is a very, very delicate situation. It has to be approved by the community, otherwise we could cause a bit of a problems with our acceptance. And of course, if any staff or caretaker gets cholera, it's a strong indication that the IPC is not very well done in the CTC, and it has become a cholera transmission centre. Right. So this is another question that comes up quite regularly. Who is responsible to close the CTC and how to do so? It's a very prominent question. These are photos sent by Bill Gay. I think they were in Ethiopia when I was there last time. But we see it's a strange way of just deserting the camp. We have a responsibility, MSF, if we run a cholera treatment center, we have the responsibility to safely close the latrines, safely close the waste area, safely seal those locations so none of this toxic and harmful material can be exposed to people who come onto the site afterwards. So do not forget to do the exit strategy, and it is not actually in the new cholera guideline, so it's something that we're trying to put together. Dimensioning of CTC, as I said, because we can now have chairs with holes cut in it, 50% of the patients could be sitting in chairs rather than lying in beds, which reduces the actual volume of the CTCs. Smaller CTCs, under 200 beds are best, and patients need 4 meters squared for a bed and 2 meters squared for a chair. So you can actually play around. In hospitalization, 45 meters square tent can have 8 beds would be best with a nurse post, or you can have, if they link 2 together, you can have 18 beds with a nurse post with 2 tents. So this gives you a little example, as I said before, because you're putting people on chairs if they're not too seriously, if they don't need to be bedridden, then it reduces the amount of space you need and the amount of beds you need. And also it's a bit more respectful, I think. But you see the example of the disco beds we usually use in the catalogue, and the normal cholera beds, and the placing of the buckets under the beds where required. And this is an example of a fairly good condition cholera treatment center. There are a few things wrong with this, but at least we have the buckets for the stools under the beds. We have a clean environment, and at the end there you'll see a cleaner and a water supply. So the difference and the number of caretakers is 0, as you can see in this situation. So it's much more controlled and easier for the doctors and the nurses to work around the patients. Again, the water supply or stress is still 60 litres per person per day. And if it's for ORS, it's 10 litres per person per day. And in the community, it's 15 to 20 litres potable water at community level if possible. The chlorine level is slightly higher than used to be, and that covers us for some using of, for killing the virus, and also to having a bit more stronger solutions if, say, the cup is dirty or something like this. So the chlorine solutions, the free residual chlorine measure is slightly higher. Chlorine solution 0.05 when touching the skin, the same. 0.2 when spraying on the floors, the same. 1% mother solution for creating your free residual chlorine is the same, and 2% is the same as well. So it's just reinforcing the guidelines. And it goes now into the community response. As Maite was saying, there's more focus on the hygiene kits and the discouragement of spraying in the homes. It used to be a very common practice for the hygiene promoters to run to the house where the person had cholera and start spraying the house and spraying the people with chlorine solution. That is now strongly discouraged. As Maite was saying, the properly used disinfection kits are much more effective to stop the spreading other than going in and spraying a house. And we said before as well, Maite, the kits should be delivered to the caregivers inside the CTC if possible. You can, if you want to, do an exit kit as well. If the person doesn't come, if the caretaker doesn't come with the patient, you can do an exit kit. As Maite says, it gives a chance to clean the area as it goes through. So the focus will be more on the hygiene promotion and the community and health promotion, and prevention is a bigger priority in the new guidelines. So this is the same slide as Maite had before, but it's just to remind you on this ring strategy that we're trying to focus on, especially being strongly related to the messages from the health promoters on how to use the kits and how to find the people who could be infected or could be exposed to the cholera virus. As you can see, it's the same slide as Maite's, but it's just to stress that this ring strategy is what we're focusing on now as the major strategy for MSF. Again, the one thing I want to talk about with this one, the same thing with Maite. Maite talked about training people how to clean the fake house, but we didn't mention very much on the contents of the hygiene kits. So you can see here the hygiene kit has a bucket with a tap for water supply. It has chlorine powder here, which I'm not very happy with using chlorine powder for distribution as a kit, but to give you an idea, there could be a chlorine generating product like Jik or something like that with maybe 5% or 3% chlorine solution, which would be more suitable for them to go and clean their house. The PNG packet there you see is the Procter & Gamble Pure that you might know, which flocculates and chlorinates the water, which is quite useful for 10 litres at a time. Then you have the aqua tabs, which are basically NADCC tablets for chlorinating drinking water. And then you have bars of soap, and then you have a jerry can for controlling your drinking water. So this is just an example of what you could have in your hygiene kits. But I would not mix the I would not give them both aqua tabs and P&G. I would not give them chlorine powder and P&G, because you should be very clear on all the hygiene messages you give on how to use them. It's very key to be successful on how to use them. So the main changes in the guidelines is obviously we did find this, that well chlorination is not recommended, which is the treatment of chlorine and putting chlorine in the well basically, which doesn't work. Household water treatment is low impact unless there's a high hygiene promotion controlled. Then you have hygiene promotion and hand washing, which is the most effective for reducing diarrhea. But knowing the importance does not translate into practice. So it's not just they know how to wash their hands, they have to wash their hands. And then, as Martin mentioned as well, the intrafamily disinfection. Spraying is no longer recommended, of course, but the impact of distribution of disinfection kits in the ring strategy and a health promotion follow-up has been proven to be the most effective way of dealing with the cholera. So I think I'm trying to do it right on time, so we're doing okay time-wise. Just a little last slide just with the word thing, but if you please write some comments down in the conversation box for any questions you have. This concludes the lecture part of the webinar, and now we're free to answer your questions and listen to your comments on our webinar on cholera. Thank you very much for listening.
There was a question before on let me read it. Up. Talking about the distribution of kits in camps. So asking, I cannot find it now. Does that mean that we need to distribute hygiene kits to camps population during a cholera outbreak? Well, yes. So in fact, in any cholera outbreak, we have to have beforehand ready, which is going to be the composition of our kits that we are going to distribute. And as soon as the first case comes, so there should be a kit being distributed and follow up to the household level. So that's what we should be doing. It's true that in some countries we find that the government is still doing quite a bit of spraying of chlorine. Well, so it's fine, but we have to keep in mind that using a chlorine sprayer is just a one-moment intervention disinfection. What happens 1 hour later if someone vomits, or if someone share a container that is dirty with cholera vibrio? So this is what we are trying to cover this gap. Okay?
Okay, go on to the next question, please, Maite.
Which is the next question? Well, here there was a comment, right, by the religious guy sometimes doing the washing of the body, and that could be if the person is properly trained with a medical person as well along. So that can be a possibility.
And also the religious person or the religious leader could supervise or overlook that there is no bad manipulation of the body that's contrary to the belief and the care of the ex-patient. Okay, next question, Maite, is how long do we expect to keep the patient in chairs? Weak patients would like to lie down anyway. Would you like to take that one, Maite, or would you want me to?
You can go ahead, yeah.
Okay. When you look at a cholera patient, there are different levels that they come in at. In some cases, they come in very quite sick, and yes, of course, if they're very weak and very sick, they lie down, they go straight into observation very quickly into hospitalization, where they can be put on an IV line and lie down straight away. But there is quite a large number of people, especially if they come in early enough with just the first stages of diarrhea, where they can be treated with ORS, and they can sit on a chair and feel quite comfortable sitting on a chair, and for maybe 1 day or something, on and off for a chair for 1 day, before they gain enough body mass and their body fights the virus themselves, so they can actually itself, so they can actually leave. So I expect them to sit on a chair for maybe half a day to a day while they recover their body fluids, and then they will go to maybe in recovery tent. There will be more chairs in recovery tent instead of beds, so people can sit there and be recovered. But yes, any weak patient or any patient that shows sign that will deteriorate goes to the beds, not to the chairs.
And I guess just to complement that, because in the new guideline, there's like a little sketch of what an oral rehydration point would be. And that one is mostly done as well with chairs, when the people would just get a little bit better throughout the day. Yeah.
Hygiene kits, Maite, do you have to do all or just the suspect people, or just the patients for the distribution of kits?
That the patients that are finally diagnosed as cholera is the ones that we have to distribute the disinfection kits. And what is important in the disinfection kits is not only the distribution at the CTC, but is this follow-up of our community health workers up to their house to see how the disinfection kit is being used at the household level.
The new strategy implies to increase the health education component. That is very correct. The hygiene promotion and health education component is very strong, especially in cases, for example, Haiti was a prime example where the hygiene and health promotion was not done, and we saw a massive increase in patients over a very short period of time because people didn't know or understand what they had to do. So yes, it's still very important.
Yes, and it's important to know that all the other NGOs are sort of following the same sort of approach. What they call rapid response teams are the persons that would go to the household to follow from the CTC who is sick, to go to their households and do this distribution of kits as well and follow that. So there might be some partnerships being done at a field level in which perhaps someone else can help in some of the activities that need to be done. So that's why it's very important to sort of understand and know what everybody is doing, so the response is better and more integrated.
It also gives an opportunity, because they know what we're doing, it gives them an opportunity to concentrate on their part of the response, and it's very clear who will do what in that response, so I think that's very good.
One thing that we wanted to ask as well, first of all, thanks for participating. And before you go, if you can sort of let us know if, which other support you might think is required for you guys to do, improve the responses on cholera. If you have some ideas, please share them with us.
And as Maite says, how do you want us to support you better in the cholera response? We are here to help with technical advice, or in some cases, if you need us out there, we can come out there to, or any other format you think would be useful to explain cholera. Should it be field training or something like this? We're open to hear your suggestions on what you think could be a useful way of transferring knowledge on this subject. And just before you leave, also, can I just say, just before you leave, as well as cholera, what other subjects would you like to see in this format? Would you like another webinar on a different subject or anything that's feasible? Please have a think about it and see what else you think would be useful in this format.
Here, there's a question. Is the health education aspects as a structure as the WASH aspects? I don't fully understand the question. I mean, The health education is really contextualized because it needs to know how exactly what's the population that you are dealing with to know better how to approach the messages. But this structure of like distributing the kit, follow the kit at the cholera treatment center, and following the patients at their household and working around the household, that's very structured, and it has to be done hand with the health community workers within MSF, or if another organization takes over as well. Sorry,
Sorry, just the last one. It'll be good to have videos of a real CTU. On the internet, there is a couple of trainings done by MSF on what's inside a CTU and what the links are and what it looks like, and we can put that on the documentation as well.
So perhaps we can add these links to these videos at the end of the presentation as links to the presentation that we will share with you guys. Thank you very much again for everybody connecting. And then, yes, let's hope to find you in another webinar or somewhere in the field or in Barcelona or in Nairobi.
Thank you for your participation and looking forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maite.
Bye-bye.